what is Bitcoin and what is it supposed to be? Because if people actually dig into that story, there's a huge opportunity for us to be more free and to make it just as easy to do business in South Carolina as it would be to do business in South Korea, and bypass the banks, bypass the payment companies, bypass all these third parties that want to get their fingers in everything. The answer to Jeffrey's actual question is whether it's a currency, is it a money, is it property? The answer to all of those is yes. And that's actually what made Bitcoin interesting.
Jeffrey Epstein is obviously Satoshi. People are saying, somebody was always going to say that. But what do you think these files mean for the ongoing mystery of who is Satoshi? Do you think it kind of ruins the mystique behind all of that?
I mean, the Satoshi story is still really complicated, and I've studied it at length. This is actually one of the major things that I was interested in Bitcoin when I got involved 12, 13 years ago now. And, I got into Bitcoin after Satoshi was gone, but I always found the sort of Genesis story to be so compelling. And in much the same way we think about, why are we here? Was the first real culture the Egyptians, or was it some other thing 10,000 years ago that's totally lost? And if you look at Satoshi and the way he spoke, we see a guy who's, obviously a Commonwealth speaker. He had very sort of British axioms in the way that he spoke. I'm still a believer that Craig Wright was very much involved at some level. Now, that's probably the most controversial thing anyone would say, but I have been to multiple of his court cases. I've seen the evidence. There's about 1 million pages of evidence there with his private communications between early cypherpunks and people, talking about these things. And I just kind of can't get past the fact that everyone has written him off as like just this impossibility, when in fact, he's one of the only guys that has specifically kept in line with what Satoshi actually cared about. First of all, I think that's really key, but also had this skill set in cryptography and economics and cybersecurity and these things. Like, he was his education was very relevant to being capable of producing Bitcoin. And then he also had a lot of negative conversations as Craig with a lot of the people that sort of joined this Blockstream cabal early on. Like, he was very much, he argued publicly with Julian Assange in the early 2000s and these things, and talking about like dark web money and all these problems. These are not problems that need to be solved. We need to solve the micropayments problem. And, so he's one of the only people that kind of comes into that. And, getting away from Craig, just focusing on what we know about Satoshi, is that he really cared about real world commerce. He was a businessman. He talked about the value of the business cycle and libertarianism being something that is abundant. Like, Bitcoin should create abundance in the economy in its ability to be used. And, so just seeing how that's changed and how the culture around it, especially with it, sitting in the hands of like BlackRock is one of the largest holders today, like that kind of thing. It's an anathema to what Satoshi's actual values were. And, it reminds me of lots of other characters that were rewritten by the mainstream. I think Martin Luther King, we just had Martin Luther King Day a couple weeks ago here in the US. And, that was a guy that did not like the US government and was probably assassinated by the FBI. But now there's a memorial to him in Washington, D.C. with this whole sanitized version of who he is. And I think it's a tragedy. And I think Satoshi is largely remembered the same way, as like a hooded cypherpunk. And that's really not who Satoshi was.
Let's kind of understand what happened there in the emails. What was Epstein's involvement with Blockstream? Was he an opportunistic investor? Was he some kind of ideological tourist that wanted to find out about Bitcoin? Obviously, there's talk about a $500,000 allocation in Blockstream's seed round. Let's just like tease all these different threads out that we're learning from the emails.
So the thing with Jeffrey is he's a really complicated character. He was super intelligent, very, very devious for one. I think everybody realizes that now, but in some of these files, I mean, he's talking about the need for intergalactic money and stuff in like the early 2000s. So he's planning like a multi-planetary empire that he needs done. And so I think when he heard of Bitcoin for the first time, I think he saw it as an obvious opportunity for various reasons. And given his very close ties to major financial institutions and all of this stuff, I think he very clearly wanted to make sure he was able to get his fingers into things if it was going to be the next money. Maybe the next banking empire, maybe the next central bank is going to emerge from this internet economy. And I think he wanted to be there as early as possible. And you see that. You see him, trying to court guys like Adam Back and other folks. And then he very clearly had a much more social relationship with Austin Hill, who was kind of the financial backer and probably the business mind behind what Blockstream became.
Let's talk about where we stand today. So the Epstein files have said a lot about Epstein's involvement in the baby steps that Bitcoin was making over those early years. Do you think it's damaged the overall brand of Bitcoin?
I don't think so. I mean, Bitcoin's been through this a bunch of times, actually. I mean, this is actually the conversation. If you were to talk to any normal person in 2015 or 16 about what Bitcoin is, they would have told you it's just dark web money for creepy people to trade, illegal pornography or whatever else. Like, I think that was the presumption about it. And it's only pretty recently changed. And so to revert, I don't think anybody would be surprised. Like, you might have, mom and pop in Kansas City saying, see, I told you it was for, creeps. But I actually don't think it's that big of a narrative problem on that front anyways.
Well, yeah, on the front of Bitcoin, where it came from, I suppose it comes from the sort of the niche, sort of your 4chans. You're kind of like, as you said, like Pirate Bay, all that sort of stuff. It sort of come out of that, but now it's been co-opted by the likes of BlackRock and the mums and dads of Kansas and whatever it is. But overall, now that it's taken on these new clothes, do you think this involvement with Epstein may, I suppose, sully those new clothes, and then it probably has to go back to what it was?
I think it's a really good opportunity to re-examine everyone's values about everything. And that's really my hope. My hope is that people look at it and say, okay, what is Bitcoin and what is it supposed to be? Because if people actually dig into that story, there's a huge opportunity for us to be more free and to make it just as easy to do business in South Carolina as it would be to do business in South Korea, and bypass the banks, bypass the payment companies, bypass all these third parties that want to get their fingers in everything. That's the real power of it. And if people realize that, hey, Bitcoin is actually anti-fragile, that the ability for like the Bitcoin cashers or the BSV people to fork away from the nonsense, that was done to protect Bitcoin, to say, hey, we're going to preserve Bitcoin's fundamental properties on this sub-segment of the network. And whenever you guys wake up, you're welcome to come use the Bitcoin that's been unsullied. And so I think it's a good opportunity to revisit the values of the people that said no to a lot of these things and ultimately got kicked out of like the official Bitcoin community. But guys like me, we were called scammers and conspiracy theorists for a long time. And then, seeing these files, everything that we predicted was happening in the background, well, now it's observably true. And so I think it's a big opportunity for people to look into that history.